Before we begin the agenda, the Wichita-Sedgwick County Metropolitan Area Planning Commission and the Wichita-Sedgwick County Board of Zoning Appeals would like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to this public hearing. Copies of the agenda for today's meeting, the public hearing procedure, and Planning Department staff reports on all agenda items are available in the lobby of this conference room. The Planning Commission's and the BZA's bylaws limit the applicant on a zoning, subdivision, or variance application and his or her representative to a total of 10 minutes of speaking time at the start of the hearing on that item, plus up to 2 minutes at the conclusion of that hearing. All other persons wishing to speak on agenda items are limited to 3 minutes per person. However, if they feel that it is needed and justified, the chairman may extend these times by up to 2 minutes. All speakers are requested to state his or her name and address for the record when beginning to speak. When you are finished speaking, please write your name, address, and the case number on the sheet provided in the lobby. This will enable staff to notify you if there are any additional proceedings concerning that item. Please note that all written and visual materials you present to the Commission and the Board will be retained by the Secretary as part of the official record. If you are not speaking but you wish to be notified about future proceedings on a particular case, please sign in on that same sheet. The Planning Commission and the Board are interested in hearing the views of all persons who wish to express themselves on the agenda items. However, we ask that all speakers please be as concise as possible and avoid long repetitions of facts or opinions which have already been stated. For your information, the Wichita City Council has adopted a policy for all city zoning items. A copy of this policy is available in the lobby. The City Council relies on a written record of the Planning Commission hearings and does not conduct its own additional public hearings on these items. The decision of the BZA is final. Any appeal of a decision of the BZA is to district court.
First item on our agenda is the approval of minutes for December the 19th, 2019. My records show that absent were Joe Johnson and Mr. Rob Hartman. Is there a motion?
We need some amendments to that as well.
Okay.
I'd second that with, I don't know how you want to handle the amendment.
We've got on page 29 of the minutes, it indicates that Mr. Richardson voted no on the final motion to defer the case 21st and all over to January 23rd, but he indicates he did not vote no, which makes sense because he made the motion to do that. We're showing Dual, Miles, and Foster, and we're wondering if anybody remembers who the fourth no vote was. If not, we can figure it out and just correct it. Well, she's already on there. Yeah, it's got Dual, Miles, Foster. I think it might have been Blake, but yeah, Rob wasn't here, so I don't know if it was.
I have a correction. They've got me both here and absent on the.
Okay, so we'll fix that.
Yeah. Mr. Johnson. Okay, do we have a motion with those changes? Is that who made the motion, Mr. Green?
Sure. Yeah, I move that we
second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second with changes. Those in favor of the motion signify with a raised hand. Those opposed, passes 6-0-2. We will try to see which items we can take by consent. The first item for consideration is from the Subdivision Committee, Agenda Item 2.1, Revised One-Step Final Plat West Ridge 1 Edition. Anybody on the commission wish to hear that item? Is there anybody in the audience that wish to hear that item? Seeing none, we'll take that by consent. Agenda item 2.2, a final plat for the Catholic Charities Edition. Anybody on the commission want to hear that item? Anybody in the audience wish to hear that item? Seeing none, we will take that by consent. Agenda item 2.3, final plat, Jackson Heights Townhouse Edition. Anybody on the commission wish to hear that item? Anybody in the audience wish to hear that item? We will take that by consent. Agenda item 2.4, one-step final plat, Seneca Substation Edition. Anybody on the commission want to hear that item? Anybody in the audience wish to hear that item? Take that on consent. Agenda item 2.5, one-step final plat, Claunch Edition. Anybody on the commission wish to hear that item? Anybody in the audience wish to hear that item? Take that by consent. Agenda item 2.6, one-step final plat, Villas at Oak Creek, Second Edition. Anybody on the commission want to hear it? Anybody in the audience wish to hear that item? Take that by consent. Agenda item 2.7, one-step final plat, Oak Knoll Industrial Park, Third Edition. Anybody on the commission want to hear that? Anybody in the audience wish to hear that? Take that by consent.
Move for approval on items 2.1 through 2.7.
Second.
Have a motion by Mr. Hartman, a second by Mr. Foster. All those in favor signify with the raised hand. Motion passes unanimously 8-0. Public hearing items, I do think that we'll need to hear item 3.1. Next item is 3.2, a vacation request on property near East 63rd Street South and west of K-15 Highway. Anybody on the commission want to hear that item? Anybody honest wish to hear that item? We will take agenda item 3.2 by consent. Item 3.3, a vacation for access control on property zoned rural residential located northwest corner of East 45th Street South, or north and north 159th Street East. Anybody on the commission want to hear that item? Anybody in the audience wish to hear that item? We'll take that by consent. Agenda item 3.4, city vacation for a sewer easement, south side of East 21st Street and approximately a quarter mile west of North 127th Street East. Anybody in the commission want to hear that? Seeing none, anybody in the audience wish to hear that? Take that by consent. Agenda item 3.5, city vacation of a portion of a platted 10-foot utility easement located a third mile south of East 21st Street and a quarter mile east of North Rock Road. Anybody on the commission want to hear that? Seeing none, anybody in the audience wish to hear that? We'll take that by consent. Agenda item 3.6, city vacation of portion of a complete access control east side of South Hoover Road and a half mile south of West Harry. Anybody on the commission want to hear that? Anybody in the audience wish to hear that? Take that by consent.
I move for approval from 3.2 through 3.6.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Joe Johnson, second by Mr. Hartman. All those in favor of that motion signify with the upraised hand. Motion passes unanimously 8-0. Public hearings, agenda item 4.1, conditional use to allow wrecking and salvage on 10 acres associated with zone change, located south of East 31st Street and west of South Broadway. Anybody in the commission want to hear that item? Anybody in the audience wish to hear that item? We have somebody, so we will hear item 4.1. Agenda item 4.2, a conditional use to permit daycare, property north of East 13th Street and west of North Hillside. Anybody on the commission want to hear that item? Anybody in the audience wish to hear that item? We will take that one by consent. Agenda item 4.3, conditional use to permit utility located east of South Seneca and a half-mile south of West Pawnee.
Mr. Chairman, I have questions for the applicant on that item.
Okay, we will go ahead and hear that one. Agenda item 4.4, community unit plan with an amendment. West side of North Amadon and north of West 21st Street North. Anybody in the commission wish to hear that item? Mr. Hartman? Agenda item 4.5 has been deferred. Agenda item 4.6, a zone change from B multifamily to general commercial, east of 1st Street and east of 2nd Street, 340 North Hydraulic Avenue is the address. Anybody on the commission want to hear that item? We will hear that item. Agenda item 4.7 is a zone change from SF5 to TF3, quarter mile east of I-235 and North Dorr Street. Anybody on the commission want to hear that item? Anybody in the audience wish to hear that item? We will take 4.7 by consent. Agenda item 4.8, zone change from rural residential to SF20, north of 215th Street West and West 21st Street North. Anybody on the commission want to hear that item? Anybody in the audience wish to hear that item? We will take 4.8 by consent.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve 4.2, 4.7, and 4.8.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Bill Johnson, a second by Mr. Hartman. All those in favor of that motion signify with the upraised hand. Motion passes unanimously, 8-0. Looks like our first item for business is going to be agenda item 3.1.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Philip Zievenbergen, Associate Planner with Planning Staff. Vacation 2019-39 is a vacation request to vacate the south 18.5 feet of the platted 25-foot building setback on a property address 341 West Carlisle. You can see it's east of Gold Street, which actually becomes McLean, so it's about half a mile east of Seneca and about quarter mile south of South 31st Street. The applicant has an existing carport on the site. They were cited for this carport because it was encroaching into the front setback, and were told they needed to pursue this vacation in order to keep it. The applicant is requesting to vacate the south 18.5 feet of the 25-foot setback, reducing the setback to 6.5 feet on the front. You can see here on the site plan, here's Carlisle Street. This is their driveway. The red box indicates their carport, which is 24 by 26 feet and can accommodate 2 vehicles. It sits in front of a garage that they're using for storage, and their house is behind that on the property. The applicant has installed guttering along the west side of the carport to help ensure that runoff does not go onto the neighbor's property. As you can see in the pictures here, we've got 2 of them. This one, the carport is further to the west than their site plan shows. They were not going to spend the money to have the carport moved to go in line with their side setback until they were sure that the vacation case would go through. They didn't want to have to spend the money twice to move it and then potentially tear it down if it was not approved. One of the conditions in the staff report is that they have to provide proof that the carport has been moved to the west to be in line with their side setback before this case goes on to City Council for final approval. A discussion in the subdivision committee meeting was related to the side paneling that you see on both sides here. One of the conditions coming out of the subdivision committee meeting was that those side panels would also be removed, and that would just be the posts holding it up and the roof structure on top of that. I think that's all I've got to present to you guys. I can stand for any staff questions.
Any questions for Philip? Mr. Johnson?
You know, if the sides are removed and it becomes a canopy rather than a building, does that change anything?
It's still considered a carport. If this, there's a carport down the street, let me get to the aerial right here. This carport, we don't have street view images of it, but Mr. Richardson can confirm this as well. He drove by the site. This one has partial side paneling, and basically, regardless of the side paneling, it would be considered a carport, and it's still considered a structure, and it's encroaching into the setback.
Mr. Florence?
Did this actually encroach just in the side yard setback, but did it actually go up on the neighbor's property?
It is not on the neighbor's property. Worst case scenario would be on the property line right now.
One of the reasons I wanted to hear this is just because of the split votes. I was curious as to what the thinking of the subdivision committee members were in regard to this issue. So if anybody wants to chime in on that, Mr. Richardson.
Well, I think some of the subdivision committee thought it just ought to be removed, period. And I think the compromise was to leave it there and take the side panels off of it, get it inspected, and move it, because if you drive by it, it's sitting right on the property line, exactly on the property line, so it doesn't meet the setbacks there. It was kind of to Bill's point, does it? And so I think it was some members would have preferred we totally remove it, and came out that let's make a compromise here and just take the panels off the side. It's still going to have to be moved and inspected. My concern, it's one of those that has a frame that runs along the ground, and I don't know what happens without having inspected. If you get a high wind, that thing's liable to be down the street if it's not properly secured, and I'm not sure how you do that, but I think we just want to make sure it was properly done, and they moved it off because it's sitting right on the property line there, that side that you see in the photo there. So I think that was the compromise, was take the sides off and leave it there.
Mr. Florence, did you have a comment or a question?
This is a continuation of a lot of people building stuff without permits, then say, oops, I'm sorry. And, you know, we have a code for a reason, and it's required that they get a permit, and that would have been caught if they had went through the proper process.
Additional questions for staff? Seeing none.
I've got a question.
Okay, Mr. Hart.
On the structure itself, Lowell was saying the bottom of it has a metal frame.
Yeah, the metal frame runs along the ground right there where he shows you the arrow. So I don't know if it has, if it's secured, 2 or 3 or 4 feet in the ground or not. If not, it's a real hazard, and that's why I think part of our condition was to have it inspected and get a building permit to make sure it's properly installed, because it could, in theory, end up flying down the street, which wouldn't be good. I'm sure there's a way to secure it, and maybe it is properly, but we can't tell that.
Can you tell if the siding actually is part of the structural component of keeping it together?
No, it's not. There's ridges that run up, as you can see in his It's kind of a rigid frame that runs all the way around and along the ground, and then they attach the paneling to the side there. So those could come off without any structure, in my opinion, with any structural.
Is the roof metal, or is that actually a wood roof on top of that?
You know, I think there may be pictures. Whether it has shingles
like it could
on
be
it.
metal. The applicant may be able to speak to that. She may know more than.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter.
There's no more questions for staff. We'll ask the applicant to come forward.
It is, yeah, in the pictures I took, it's metal. Yeah.
Okay. If the applicant would come forward, state your name and address for the record. You will have 10 minutes.
Shelby Cotney, 341 West Carlisle.
Shelby, can you speak? We'll move that out. Thank you.
Shelby Cotney, 341 West Carlisle. The roof is made of metal and the sides were an option, so it doesn't, as I was told, it doesn't have anything to do with it structurally. And it is bolted to the ground. I'm not sure how far the bolts go in, but every 2 to 3 feet it has bolts in the ground along the bottom part that you guys were talking about. Was there any more questions other than those?
Any other questions? Don't see any. Is there anything else you want to add?
I don't think so.
Okay. If there's no more questions, thank you. Is there anybody in the audience that wishes to speak on this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission. Mr. Johnson, Mr. Bill Johnson.
Scott, could you explain, the only thing we're approving is a setback in the front setback yard, right?
Yes, that's correct. The vacation would reduce the front setback. That's correct.
And so in order to leave it where it's at, she would have to take it in front of who?
In order to leave it where it's at, it would require a variance of the side setback by the Board of Zoning Appeals.
From, that would be the next item. If this one were to be approved, then we would recess this meeting, open up the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Well, this does not have a variance associated with it. There's a condition of approval requiring her to provide proof that she has moved it outside of the side setback before we go to City Council for final.
Okay.
I'd move to approve as stated by the subdivision committee.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Richardson, a second by Mr. Foster. Any further discussion? Those in favor signify with the upraised hand. Mr. Bill Johnson.
Now, what is a motion? Could you call it out, Rudd?
As it was approved by the subdivision committee, that we do not change the approval conditions of the subdivision committee, that we approve it as they did.
And that's to tear it down?
No, that's to move it and take the sides off. What we approved was moving it and removing the sides and getting it inspected.
But if it's moved, doesn't the sides need to come off?
Well, that was one of the conditions we put on it, was to remove the side so you could see through it. And then move it off the property line. And then as a part of this, we reduced the front setback.
Is everybody clear? Okay. All those in favor of the motion signify by the upraised hand. Motion passes 6-2. Okay, next item, please. Agenda item 4.1.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Kathy Morgan for the Planning Department. This case, you have the zoning map up on the screen, and it is for a zone change because a portion of this is still zoned single family, and then a portion of it, as you can see, is general commercial, and they want to make all of it limited commercial. And this is, in looking at the historic aerial maps, this has been a wrecking salvage yard since before 1968. It's Don Schmidt. So just keep that in mind. And again, here is the aerial showing this building up here is where they have parts inside and they have an office. And it is my understanding that they operate this business 24/7, and I think the agent can address some of that additional information that's not in the staff report. So staff is recommending, because in the comprehensive community investments plan, it's within that area that's shown as industrial. So it does meet the standards or the recommendations of the comprehensive plan. It is, let me go back here. There is SF5 to the west of it. That is undeveloped at this time. And there is a VFW Lodge or something that just up here south of 31st Street that I'm not sure that it's being utilized at the time. So this is the site plan that was submitted, and the orangey yellow, that OSU color, Oklahoma State color that surrounds the okay, is proposed. I'm sorry. Oh, well, I had to get that in there. Is proposed for the solid fencing required in the zoning code. It also requires, the zoning code also requires 100-foot landscape setback from arterials. So this area right here, and again, the agent is going to discuss this area and where they want to put the fencing requirement. This is the office building intake area. They have parts inside. Looking south, they have a chain link fence abutting right on the property line along that sidewalk. Again, looking south. This is looking north along the east side. This is a used car lot over here to the east. And then I had fun inside the salvage part. This is looking north from the west property line. Here is that American Legion or VFW building. This is looking east at the building, the office building, warehouse building. This is looking toward Broadway from the middle of the lot. Okay, and this is looking down that solid fence to the southwest corner. This area back in here is SF5, no buildings on it. And here you can see some of it does have some screening with trees, mature trees on the SF5 side of the lot, or side of the property. And these are the apartments that are north of the site. This is a garage that is northeast of the site. This is looking east from in front of the building. Here's Broadway in the background. This is looking west from in front of the site, and you can see their hurricane fence or chain link fences on the right at the sidewalk. This is looking west at the SF5 zoning, so there needs to be some upgrading of the solid fencing, which I'm sure that will be taken care of according to the site plan. And the recommendations, there are 17 conditions that we require for the conditional use to be approved, and these are standard for wrecking and salvage yards. And 15 is something that I think the agent is going to address, because we require, in the past, we've required a drainage plan for the wrecking salvage yard and the environmental services on the runoff, potential runoff. So staff is recommending approval of this conditional use and zone change with the conditions listed in your staff report.
Any questions for Kathy? Saying that, thank you. Agent or applicant? Craig, state your name and address for the record, please, and you will have 10 minutes.
I think you're up here on the first page, aren't you?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
I had a lot of pictures.
He did.
Okay, that's your site plan. Oh.
Yeah, that was,
that was it. Right there you go.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission, my name is Greg Ferris. I represent the owners of the property and the contract purchaser of the property, which is Copart. This property is operated, as Kathy said, for a number of years as a wrecking and salvage, truly a wrecking and salvage yard where you take a car in, you tear it apart, and you sell parts. Copart is buying this property, but they will not be doing quote-unquote wrecking and salvage. However, the zoning code does not have a provision for what Copart actually does, which is take wrecked vehicles, store them for insurance companies, and then auction them off to wrecking and salvage yards. So there will not be actual wrecking and salvage going on anymore at this. These vehicles that you see will be gone. The area will be cleaned up dramatically. Now, Copart could have foregone this process because of the non-conforming status of the property. They could operate it exactly as it is today. That would be a chain link fence. They could operate it right up to the property line, just as it's being operated today. They could make a few modifications to the building as long as they didn't do over 30%, and they could go off and running. They decided to be a good neighbor and to be a good citizen. They do operate one further south that they wanted to make this compatible with what their normal operations are, and that would be to include a solid screening fence all the way around. That will be a new fence, not what you saw. They'll be removing what's currently there and be installing new solid metal fencing. I have two issues. Kathy mentioned the drainage plan. As we said, this has been operating for some 50 years in this site. If they decide to do any construction, they'll have to plat this property, at which time they'll have to do a full drainage study and a full drainage plan. But really, to basically continue exactly what they're doing today, we think that all the other conditions we're okay with, including the environmental and those things, but we think that a drainage plan is a bit onerous at this time for this property. So we would ask that this be approved without the condition of number 15. The other issue has to do with the site plan. This is a site plan I submitted to Kathy at the last minute because I saw that there was an error in the original site plan, and that was that her, and in my map it's yellow like the shocker color. When I look at it here, it shows up the ugly, I'm sorry. But if you look at yours, you'll see that the line didn't match up with the actual property line. So we moved that back. And the other thing that they wanted to do was to have the fence, and I actually made an error. I thought this building was 20 feet. It's 30 feet. So this fence right here should be 30 feet so that they can come straight across. And that's because they get cars in at different times, and when they have employees there, they want to be behind that fence just for security purposes. So they'll open a gate, they'll let the car come in, they'll close the gate, and the employees can then come in and park behind the fence, and they don't have to be exposed to the environment down in South Broadway later at night. While it may be fine, there may be also times it's not. So the code actually only requires that there be no wrecking and salvage on the street right up to the street. One of the former building directors determined that a 150-foot setback was what was required to not be adjacent to the street. We asked that to be amended to 100 feet, which is staff has agreed to that, and we agree with that. So we will not be doing any wrecking and salvage within that 100 feet. We will be working with staff on a landscape plan in that 30-foot street front yard along 31st Street, but we'd ask that you would approve this amended site plan with the fence moved back to the 30-foot line. We would ask that you approve the conditions as stated, except eliminating number 15, all other conditions, and understand that, again, they can do exactly what they want to do today on that property. They won't be, subject to all these other conditions of setbacks and all those things. So we believe this is an improvement. Be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions for Mr. Ferris? Mr. Foster?
So that would leave 70 feet on the south side of the fenced area that would then be allowed to receive the storage of the vehicles. It wouldn't take on wrecking and salvage, but it would take on the storage of what they need to do.
No, we would not be allowed to store cars there. We'd be allowed to park, employee parking and those kind of things, but you cannot store a wrecked vehicle in any of that front 100 feet. That is not permissible under the zoning code, and we're not asking for that to be allowed.
Mr. Richardson?
Yeah, I guess that was my question, is what happens in the 70 feet, and yeah. So I'm not sure how the fence fits with the setback. I mean, it's just for security. I mean, you put a fence anywhere you want it to as long as you honored the setback, right? I mean, technically. I'm asking staff.
Well, there are some limitations on where you can put fences, but the proposal that they're suggesting is permissible.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hartman?
So is it my understanding they're going to remove all of the salvage cars that are there now?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Are they going to remove all the salvage product that's there
My
now?
understanding is that they'll be selling those off to other salvage yards. They may not go in and haul them off all at once, but they don't keep cars for salvage. They sell whole vehicles for to wrecking and salvage yards or for scrap. So my guess is what they'll be doing with these existing vehicles is, getting rid of them at their auctions, and they have worldwide auctions that they do all the time. So they'll be auctioning these off to clean those out of there because they need the room for, that's why because they have a huge lot down off of, I believe that's MacArthur, and they just need more room, and there's no room to grow over there. So this will be another one of their insurance lots is what they really are.
And so they're going to tear down all of the fencing that's there now and put in new solid
Correct.
metal fencing even across the frontage there of...
There is no fence actually along other than a chain link, and that chain link won't be there either.
Okay.
Along 31st Street.
Mr. Foster?
Will any new paving be installed, or is the whole site already paved and will remain in place?
There is significant paving. Where there is not the hard pack that's generally allowed by wrecking and salvage, they'll be going in and doing that because they'll need that. So we won't be paving this whole lot, just compacting what's there where it's not in good repair.
Mr. Joe Johnson?
I have a question on drainage to staff. Is there any issues that we think would require a drainage plan that's been brought up in the past?
How you doing?
Joe Hickle, I'm the city stormwater engineer. I had prepared this speech before coming here to present our case that a drainage plan would be required. Mr. Ferris identified that the project would be proceeding through the normal platting process, and at such time a drainage plan would be required. So I think that it's okay at this point to waiver the drainage plan as a requirement of the zoning change. It is true this is an old site and we don't have a word one on drainage on this site, and we wanted to get that if there was not going to be a platting process. With the platting process about to continue later on, then I think we could do the drainage plan later.
Thank you.
Could I say something? I don't want to mislead anybody. We're not going to plat that unless we build a new building. Okay, we don't have a building scheduled today. I imagine they will eventually, but right today. So I didn't want to mislead anybody that we're getting ready to do platting as a part of this. We will have to do obviously drainage when we plat it, but there is no platting imminent to this at this particular point.
Well, to that point, I think as long as we all understand and agree that the operation of the site's not going to change from what it is now until such time as you plan to move forward, then we could waive the drainage plan at this time.
Thank you.
Mr. Hartman.
Joe, do you know where the drainage is going to now?
Unfortunately, it's a pretty flat site and it kind of goes where it wants to when it rains. So it's not well defined, and we don't have a drainage plan that does define that. When they do a drainage plan, they're probably going to need to start with identifying what the existing drainage patterns are and then plan for what they would change them to based on their site plan.
Mr. Richardson?
Yeah, I think just to clarify, Copart is at least national, if not international. It's a big operation, and I think they simply act as an intermediary. I remember I had to go to their current facility when my wife totaled out her van, and I had to take the title down there, and it was, you know, they had a really very professional run office down there, and so I think it'll be an improvement. We get some of these cars that have probably been there. You know, I grew up in the south side of town. I'd bet some of them been there since I was a kid. So having the inventory turn is probably a lot better than having it all sit there forever and ever.
I think one of the biggest issues too is if you drive down 31st Street, you will see that they have vehicles stored right up to the property line. That will go away. So we think that this will be a major improvement to this property.
Any additional questions for the applicant? Seeing none? Thank you, Mr. Ferris. Anybody from the audience wish to speak on this issue? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission.
I'd move for approval with the elimination of item 15.
Revised site plan.
And the revised site plan?
Yes, and the revised site plan.
Second. I'll second that.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any additional questions or comments? All those in favor signify with the uplifted hand. Motion passes unanimously, 8-0.
They must have some pretty old cars down there if they've been there since you were young.
Were any of them your cars?
There's some antiques down there.
Were any of them your cars when you were little?
Well, could well be.
Next item is agenda item 4.3. Mr. Foster, you had a question before we hear that. Let you ask your question, and then we.
I just had a few questions for the applicant, that's all.
Okay, if the applicant come forward. Charlie, state your name and address for the record, please.
Charlie Brown, PEC 303 South Topeka. We are agent for the applicant, Evergy, and we have two members of their staff present today as well. So if I can't answer these questions, these gentlemen might step up and help me out. So,
Mr. Foster, fire away.
Given my background, I'm inclined to study your landscape plan. And so I've just got some comments related to that. One is, if you look at the calculations, there's a fair number of trees beyond what's required on it. For example, on the north side of the property, you can count the existing trees as part of the required. And instead of more than a dozen or so, you would only need like 3 trees in that area. And you can go through and look at the other calculations, and you'll find you can do about 9 less trees total. So question number 1 is, I would assume that landscape would be required on the south side, given that it abuts the single family, and we don't see landscape over there unless you count the existing tree that's there. The second thought is, I checked with the community forestry program coordinator at the state, and the director of the Pear Horticultural Center. And the Black Hill spruce and the Spartan are not recommended trees. So you may want to study that recommendation there. For example, Taylor juniper would be a much better selection than the Spartan. So
would you repeat what species would be more?
It's called Taylor juniper.
Taylor juniper, okay.
Yeah, I won't go into the details of why those aren't good selections, but you can find the research on it.
Okay, thank you.
That's all I had, Mr. Chairman.
With that, I'll go back to the idea of doing this by consent. Is there anything else anybody wants to hear on this item? If not, we'll take it by consent.
So moved.
Well, let me check the audience. Is there anybody in the audience that wishes to hear this item? Seeing none, Mr. Foster.
I was curious what the construction of the wall is going to be like. I know we're going to deal with that, but is it a decorative type wall?
I will let one of these gentlemen come speak on that. It is a solid wall that comes in sections. They build the columns, pillars, and then they set the piece in between. So this is Chris Meyer with Evergy.
Chris Meyer with Evergy in Topeka, and just as Charlie said, it is a precast decorative aesthetic wall, and it is just as Charlie said, they build the columns and they slide the panels in between. So
I was going to say, you could save a couple $1,000 if you study the landscape ordinance pretty close. Given that it's a decorative wall, I don't think you need all that planting.
Okay. Thank you.
We have a motion.
So moved.
We have a motion by Mr. Richardson, second by Mr. Green. Sorry, Melanie, he beat you to it. All those in favor of approval signify with the up left hand. It passes unanimously 8-0. Next item, 4.4.
Okay, I'm not sure what's going on. It seems to be. Hit what now? Hit what? 9.8? Is Jim doing that? Sorry. Dave Yara with planning staff. This case is CP 2019-39. This is a request to make an amendment to the Sweetbriar Shopping Center CUP on parcel 10, which is the property outlined in blue, 21st Street to the south. This is Amidon, which is to the east of the property. This particular lot is developed as an existing self-storage complex. You can see the aerial outlining the facility. The only thing that is really happening here is the property is changing hands and the new buyers, and I'll let the owner applicant explain all that, but their corporate attorneys had requested that this be amended to bring this particular property into compliance or conformance with the current standards we have in our zoning code for supplementary regulations on self-storage units in LC. It was an approval by the Board of Zoning Appeals back in '84, I think, when this was developed before the current code was established. And that particular BZA approval, which was required at that time for the self-storage, had comparable standards, but one of the provisions that was applied then is more onerous than the current standards, and the new buyers just simply want to bring this property into compliance with the current code, which is then on the level playing field with all the other storage complexes within the community. There are no physical changes planned for this facility. We're not building new buildings. We're not raising buildings. They're not modifying the site in any way other than perhaps a name change, and I don't even know about that. But that's really all that's really going on with this request. You can see the location. We cited in the fact that under the zoning code, that is shown as industrial. And if you really zoom into that, it is. This is the existing CUP, and it shows the boundary of parcel 10 and the photos of the location. That's the current property. You're looking north. The parking lot here is Amidon on the right side of the picture. That's kind of a more direct shot at the office and the buildings on the facility. Looking deeper into the storage complex. That is looking across the street at on the east side of Amidon. This is the entry, one of the entries into the area that comes in off of Amidon. And then that's looking south along Amidon and on the parking lot in the balance of the Street Briar Shopping Center. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Dave? Mr. Hartman.
So you're just cleaning this up so it conforms with what's being built today?
And this will make it subject to the same standards that we have on all the other self-storage facilities around the city. They're just bringing the current operation into the contemporary standards in the zoning code as opposed to the language that was done in the BZA case back in '84.
Mr. Hartman, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Does there anybody else have any issues on this that we want to hear the entire deal, or do we?
I would ask for the applicant to for the applicant not to make a presentation. Okay. I'd move for approval.
We have a motion to approve. Can we
do that?
Per
staff recommendation.
Make sure.
Second. Got that gentleman when I got here a half hour early.
I want to make sure before we go on that, is there anybody from the audience who'd like to speak on this issue? Seeing none. Okay. We have a motion to approve by Mr. Joe Johnson, second by Mr. Richardson. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those with the upraised hand? Passes 8-0-1. Next item, please.
Next item is Zone 19-49, a request by the owner to rezone the lots on North Hydraulic. The address in question is 340 North Hydraulic. You can see on the aerial the zoning map. The properties in this area are a mixture of GC zoning, which is all along the west side of Hydraulic, north of 2nd Street, as well as the one to the north at the corner of 3rd and Hydraulic, or it's all B multifamily. The owners have requested to convert this property to GC zoning, consistent with the other properties generally in the area, and their ultimate intention is to establish a car lot on the property. You can see from the aerial, this is was a residential structure. The legal description is 2 lots. The property boundaries on the GIS map kind of only show 2, but it's all consistent. This is the lot in question. The property line generally runs from this fence line to the further to the south end of this vacant lot. The vacant lot to the north is actually owned by the folks that own the property on the corner of 3rd and Hydraulic. This particular vacant lot is zoned also B, but as you can see, there's nothing on it. The commercial building at the corner of 3rd and Hydraulic is already zone GC. This is looking north along Hydraulic. This is the property in question. And you can see commercial buildings across the street. The property up there at the corner, 3rd Street now does not go through. It's been vacated. It's all owned as part of the school district. And the school district has a parking lot on their property that they own up here. And then you've got the the school itself that's up here at Central and Hydraulic. Central, you can see the lights at Central in the background. This is looking south on Hydraulic. Those are the lights at 2nd Street further to the south. You can see we've got some other residential structures scattered on, but some other, as we get further to 2nd Street, we've got GC zoning. Everything on the right-hand side is GC. This is right across the street west from the subject property. So I will tell you that this was heard by the District Advisory Board Monday night. Kathy happened to go to that one. Their recommendation was to deny the request and encourage it to be zoned to LC and put a conditional use on it for the car sales, and that was by a 9-to-1 vote. The staff is recommending approval primarily because, as we note in the staff report, we have a tremendous amount of GC already establishing along Hydraulic. Hydraulic is really one of our major arterial streets. It's already not necessarily conducive to residential use. The idea that this would be, well, it had been occupied up until recent times, but I'm not sure they're able to really find someone that wants to live right on that location on Hydraulic. It's not a bad looking house. I don't know what the inside looks like. And as we note in the staff report, if it is converted to commercial uses, they're going to have to go through the code upgrades required to comply with building code requirements as a commercial building. And also as if they have any display area on site, they'll have to meet the paving standards of the zoning code. Plus there will be perhaps some additional screening requirements on the east side where they have a single family in the background. So be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Dave? Seeing none, thank you, Dave. Agent or applicant like to come forward, please. You will have 10 minutes. State your name and address for the record.
And I'm not seeing anybody here for that.
Okay.
So.
Anybody from the audience wish to speak on this issue? Come forward, please. State your name and address for the record, and you will have 3 minutes.
Bound and determined I'm going to talk today. Leon Mader, 967 North Back Bay Boulevard. My interest is I own most of the block on the west side of the street, from 2nd Street all the way until the building that was shown in the photograph. It's mostly office warehouse, and did not know this was on the agenda. Saw it when I was here, and since there has been some question raised by the DAB, I wanted to share my thoughts as a neighbor across the street. I think GC would be fine. That whole block needs to be GC. It needs to be continuous zoning. It doesn't need to be some LC and then some GC and then some OC. We need to have, that all needs to go GC at one point. I'd hate to see it put in there some LC and then chopped up along the way. So just as a neighbor, I think it sounds like a good idea.
Any questions for the speaker? Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Is there anybody else in the audience wish to speak on this item? Seeing none, and since the applicant's not here to rebut, we'll bring it back to the commission.
Move to approve.
Have a motion by Mr. Richardson and a second by Ms. Miles to approve. All those in favor signify with the upraised hand. Opposed? Passes 8-0 or 8-1. 8-1. Okay, do we have any more items on the MAPC agenda? If not, we will adjourn the MAPC, and I will open up the Board of Zoning Appeals meeting. First item is approval of the minutes. I do think that we have, I don't know if you've got a copy of it, but a slightly amended minutes. You want to talk about that, Scott?
Yeah, Commissioner Warren pointed out that we have showing Commissioner Blick as absent, but yet he was present, so we've corrected that.
I was absent, and I'm showing as present.
Okay, that's probably our miss then.
Okay, is there a motion to approve with the amendments?
So moved.
Mr. Richardson, thank you. Is there a second? Second. Mr. Florence, thank you. All those in favor of the motion signify with the upraised hand. Passes 8-0-1. First item of business, please. A city variance to permit a 9-foot tall screening for the building. Is there anybody on the commission want to hear that item? No? Is there anybody in the audience want to hear that item? Seeing none, we'll take that by consent. Is there a motion to approve?
I move for approval.
Second.
Have a motion by Mr. Joe Johnson, a second by Ms. Miles. All those in favor signify with the upraised hand. Passes unanimously 9-0. If there's nothing else, we stand adjourned.